Good day. In this video, I'm going to teach you how to best answer "Tell me about yourself" in 2025. Okay, so topic number one I'd like to talk about here would be, should you memorize it? Okay, and in my experience, it can be a good idea to memorize your elevator pitch on the condition it's your own. So on the condition that you build something that you're proud of and you think it's good enough and I'm ready to memorize it within 5 minutes and then use it throughout my interviews. Of course, your elevator pitch might change regarding whom you're interviewing with. For instance, you'd want to maybe dive a little bit deeper with a technical audience or keep it more high level with a recruiter. But long story short, yes, memorizing is an option for elevator pitch, right? The second thing I'd like to talk about here would be, what's the worst elevator pitch I've ever heard? Okay, the worst elevator pitch, tell me about yourself, I've ever heard was from a candidate, a senior or principal technical PM, who started reading his CV almost word for word, and he kept on reading it for around 5 minutes. Okay, it was the most boring and weird experience in my coaching session, simply because I also had his CV in front of me and I could see that he was reading from that document, right? So long story short, written statements or what's designed to be consumed as a writing sample will never work as your elevator pitch for something to communicate in a job interview. And the reason for this is important because many of you would overthink about how to design it, whereas when you actually role play it, it will sound completely different, and you realize that's actually where you want where you have the most benefit, right? Now, what makes a great elevator pitch? Okay, so let's start by designing that "Tell me about yourself." Are there any frameworks to design your "Tell me about yourself"? Yes, there are. And I would not recommend you go with the STAR format. I believe it's not appropriate for your elevator pitch as much as it was designed for the "Tell me about yourself" types of questions, right? But there are some other frameworks from that other people invented. For example, Richard Blazevich PEN method. You would start with your passion for the job, then you would talk about your experience, and you would talk about what's next. Hey, where do you see yourself in 5 years from now, right? Or another interesting framework would be Bob Firestone's framework, which essentially you would start your elevator pitch by humanizing the audience, hey, maybe with some side notes, with some extracurricular activities. Then you would want to transition into your subject matter expertise. You would talk about your experience punctually. Then you would talk about what excites you the most about the opportunity that you're provided with, and then you would wrap it up. Okay, so these would be frameworks. I actually use them in my advanced training programs, where I also developed these things with specific examples, right? Now, the next topic will be the length. What's the ideal length of your elevator pitch? And I know that this is not everyone will agree with me, but in my experience, longer answers tend to drive the best interview outcomes. So people who can speak for longer and keep it interesting tend to be the better candidates, right? This is not always the case. This may change, but I would challenge you to rather try to make it longer in the beginning and then trim down the fat, so to speak, when compared to making it only 30 seconds on purpose, where there is the danger that you might be looked at as a superficial candidate, right? Now, another important factor you might want to consider here when deciding the ideal length of your elevator pitch would be the length of your job interview. Because nowadays, some companies, such as Netflix or Google, are trending towards 30-minute interviews, rather, so 30 rather than 60-minute interviews. Whereas if your interview is shorter, you can imagine that you cannot spend 10 minutes talking about yourself in a 30-minute interview, right? So this would also be a concern. And what I found works best with these things would be to simply rehearse it. So if you rehearse it, either in a coaching session, but either in the mirror even, or you can even record yourself, you will be able to self-assess what's the best length for your elevator pitch. I just don't over rehearse it, because then you might risk making it sound a bit templated, right? Next, should you use numbers in your elevator pitch? And the reason why I find this relevant to talk about is because in my experience, I've had very little success with motivational speeches in elevator pitch. So in other words, candidates who are great speakers, who would present a motivational tell me about yourself, did not tend to pass interviews as often as candidates who use the normal approach, let's say the framework approach, the ones, when you would present the information in a structured way. This being said, yes, I would advise you that you use numbers and metrics that are the most relevant for the role that you're applying for, right? Of course, if you're applying for a data-driven role, or the company advertises that they are highly data-driven, then you would want to maybe overdo it only a little bit, but don't use metrics that make no sense, right? So this will be on numbers. Now, what would be some of the mistakes, the most common and the deadliest mistakes I hear from people who make these elevator pitches? So you can have the best elevator pitch in the world, you can be the best communicator in the world if you bluff it, okay? If you bluff it and you get caught during job interviews. And in my experience, it happens far more often than people realized for them to be caught bluffing about what they say in job interviews. A recent example I could share with you would be for a technical PM who was bragging about how they trialed some AI app within their bank for 10,000 customers. They chose 10,000 customers to trial their features on. And the person interviewing with was a senior manager who immediately spotting something weird. Hey, how did this technical PM decide those 10,000 customers? And they challenged them. Hey, why 10,000? Why not 50,000? Why not 1,000? And basically the remainder of that interview went on challenging why that number and not the other. And the candidate also took the bite. They didn't say something online, yeah, you're right, I didn't decide it, but rather, it was with my boss and whatnot. They said, no, I did it, and we did it, this and that. And the whole conversation evolved in the wrong direction. That is not in the candidate's interest. They were selling themselves as a technical PM, where in fact, the manager had serious problems with their statements, right? So long story short, bluffing shows in job interviews, and you'd be amazed how easy it is to spot when a candidate is lying on the condition that you interview people regularly, right? So this would be the number one mistakes you want to avoid. The second mistake that I've seen people still make, and these are from people who are not used to speak, to have up-to-date answers in job interviews, so to speak. There's something online, so you're an exceptional leader with amazing results. So you would over-focus on your results versus the work you put in. So you would only brag about the results. Now, of course, if you're going for a senior director role, senior leadership role, that might make more sense. But I see this in all sorts of situations of people literally bragging about their achievements, but without providing any meat, any meaningful statement to back that up about the work that they put in, right? So the language is also something. If you're not used with these things, try to upgrade, try to come up to date with these as well, right? The other mistake, too long or too short. Too short, you might come across superficial, whereas too long, you might be speaking for too long and saying not much, saying nothing. You wouldn't score well on clarity of thought, and you would even risk being unintelligible, right? You could check this out, by through coaching sessions or by simply, building your ability to self-assess here, right? And the other mistake you'd want to avoid that I see candidates make all the time, especially on my website and on my paid services, is that they overthink their elevator pitch. So let's say you have 10 days until your interview and you spend 3 days on your elevator pitch. In my opinion, that's a huge overinvestment, because nowadays, the elevator pitch, yes, okay, is the first impression. It might also be the last impression when it comes to a screening round. But the importance of the elevator pitch is very limited in landing job offers, so to speak, right? Yes, you might be inclined to say, hey, it's important to make a strong first impression, right? But are your interviewing skills there? Can you interview well behaviorally? Are you subject matter expert? In my experience, people overinvest on their elevator pitch, and I would challenge you to think if you have this problem, right? And the last thing I want to talk about here would be how to end your elevator pitch, right? The first thing you should keep in mind about ending your elevator pitch, it should always be on a positive note. People who tend to end their answers on a negative note tend to be suspicious for stress or stressed out candidates, or lack of positivity is something you'd want to avoid, and especially during the first impression is last impression type of answers, right? Another approach you'd want to use to end your elevator pitch would be with a question. Hey, should you be interested in any of these experiences? I will be happy to develop more on any of these, right? So at the end of the day, the best outcome you can have from your elevator pitch would be to start the conversation with your interviewer, but not just start the conversation, which could also be challenging you on something, but rather start the conversation based on the experiences that you find the most relevant for the role that you're applying for. That is your strengths, right? So if you present them with the most interesting stuff last, chances are they would follow up on those specific experiences that you're most interested in, and therefore, drive the conversation your way. Also asking them questions and that stuff, building conversation also is a technique that people with great listening skills use, and listening skills also tend to drive great interview outcomes. So I hope you found this useful, and thank you very much for watching.